question is simple. How do we get better at walking bass? And specifically to this video, how do we do it as an electric bass player? How do we take the role of that upright, that acoustic bass? How do we get that vocabulary to sound natural and to get it to the point where we no longer have to think about doing it? We can just be in the moment and in a total flow state. I have two concepts for you today that I think are possibly the most important steps in achieving this goal of being better at walking bass. And to explain the difference between the two of them, I'm going to use language learning tools as our analogy here. You've probably all heard of Rosetta Stone or Pimsleur or Babbel. These are tools you can use online to help you learn a new language, say Spanish, for instance. That's something I'm quite passionate about learning. These tools advertise that they can help you become conversational or even fluent in a multitude of languages, when in reality, what I think they do is give you a little bit of information about the language, and what they can't possibly ever do is immerse you in the sound of that language. There's a massive difference between hola, buenos dias, ¿qué tal? And hola, buenos días, ¿qué tal? One is assimilating or reading that information from an app, and the other is born out of experience of being in Spain, in Colombia, in Chile, in Argentina, all over the 21 different Spanish-speaking countries in the world, and hearing how people actually say those words and use those phrases. So when you're immersed in that sound, you get a feel for how the language is actually used, rather than a teaching app that's going to teach you all the rules of what the language is made up of. So my two concepts for today are actually both sides. I think both sides are valid. I use Babbel. It helps fill in the blanks on some vocabulary stuff and some fundamental elements of the language I'm not familiar with. But I also have to balance that out with watching Spanish TV and speaking to native Spanish-speaking people. So to that end, the first concept, and I think the most important part of any learning process in music and in jazz and improvisation, I think, is listening. And I dedicated the first chapter of my Iconic Lines book. It's kind of a history of jazz vocabulary. It's a lot of linear information in here, but the very first chapter is all about upright bass players, walking bass, and the tradition of the instrument. And when I look at the list of bass players I chose, we go from Slam Stewart to Oscar Pettiford, Charles Mingus, Ray Brown, Paul Chambers, Ron Carter, Charlie Haden, Dave Holland. We're getting more modern players here: John Patitucci, Larry Grenadier, Christian McBride, Derek Hodge, pioneers of the instrument, and they still only scratch the surface of the depth of information that's out there just from a listening standpoint. So I've included a pretty intense list of bass players that I recommend checking out in the description of the video. It's a really long list. Don't get me wrong, I don't expect you to go through every single one, but pick one or two out at random. Perhaps pick some out that you've never heard of before and investigate their music. And in doing so, you will take that first and most important step on the path to listening and to really hearing what the role of the instrument is in the band. The reason I put bass players in the front of this book is to give you an introduction. Here we're opening the door. We're showing you the first steps on the path. Here are some of the notes. This is what they sound like. Here's a basic framework. And speaking of framework, that's what we get to next. That's where we get to the Babbel, the Pimsleur, the Rosetta Stone portion of this video, where it is useful to have exercises to drill. It is useful to understand chord tones, for instance. So what we're going to do is pick out the root, the third, the fifth, and the seventh of each chord. We're just playing the arpeggio from the root upwards. Now, it's very important, I think, to understand that this is not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to craft bass lines that flow, that have this nice up and down, this going up a hill, coming down a hill. They're not catapulting to the top of a cliff and then dropping off again. I'm not a massive fan of super angular lines. At the end of the day, it has to make sense. It's more of a linear process than it is an intervallic process. So at some point throughout these exercises, there are going to be bigger intervals than perhaps I would ever like to have in my walking bass lines. But as long as we're aware of the context of what we're doing here, this is an exercise, and it's basically laying the foundation for later on when we can start to link those things with slightly smaller intervals. Here we go, root 3, 5, 7. root 3 5 7, root 3 5 7. And maybe we do it twice with the same fingering, and then we change our fingering. So maybe we start on the 4th finger on every single one, just as a little challenge. There's our first permutation, just the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th in sequence. Exactly the same thing on every chord. The next step, I think, is to take a different combination of those. So maybe we go root, 5, 3, 7, and do that on every chord. 1, 2, 2, 3, and 3, 7, 1, 5, 3, 7. Although this might not sound like a flowing bass line just yet, it's a great restrictive practice discipline just to be able to do this all around the instrument on every single chord. Like I said, starting on different fingers each time as a challenge. So whereas it may feel really comfortable to start with the 1st finger on D, the 3rd finger on A, 4th finger on F, 1st finger on C, maybe you want to try 4, 1, 2, 4 as the fingering with the left hand, and challenge yourself to do that throughout the sequence. And it's of course important to do this in all keys. We could pick another random key, let's say E flat. We should be able to go to it straight away. 2, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 5, 3, 7, 1, 5, 3, 7. So I hope you can start to hear how these different combinations have a slightly different color, a slightly different flavor. We did 1, 5, 3, 7. Let's do something that doesn't start on the root. Let's go 3, 1, 5, 7. 2, 1, 2, 3. Change the range a little bit the second time around, so you can see even with the same pattern but changing the range of the instrument, you have flavors within flavors. I think 2 of the main objectives with this exercise, 2 of the goals with this, is to be able to play all of the same combinations on each chord, but then to be able to mix and match them. And it's when you start to mix and match and find little connecting elements that the more legitimate sounding walking lines start to appear. When you take the 3, 1, 5, 7, for instance, you go 3, 1, 5, 7 on D minor. And it's only a half step away from the 7th on D minor to the 3rd on our 5 chord on G. And it's the same as we go to the 1 chord. And then we're only a whole step up, depending on where you are in the neck, to get to the 6th chord to start the cycle again. Again, I can't iterate enough how important it is to do the listening, to be listening to Paul Chambers, to Jimmy Blanton, to Leroy Vinnegar, to Reginald Veal, to Rodney Whitaker, to Reuben Rogers. It's about putting all of this information into context. The reality and the authenticity comes from listening to those masters. And if you're brand new to this, don't put too much pressure on yourself to learn so much right away. Take it really easy. Take it at your own pace. Pause and rewind this video. Go back to the different permutations. Check out the music in the tab on the screen. If you want to have some of these books in person to work with, these are available. Signed copies of these are available from my website. Everything is linked below. You can have digital copies also. Everything comes with play-alongs and with tab, standard notation. You can have that workbook in your hands should you please. But just with this video, pause and rewind, take it at your own pace. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. Be kind to yourself. It's really important to know how you learn and what your pace is. And when you're away from the instrument, put the headphones on and just be listening to that beautiful music. Look at the list of musicians I've given you below and try and pick out someone you've never heard before. The discovery of new stuff is really what always sparks that joy in me and that motivation to be like, oh wow, what is that? I don't understand it. Let's go after it and let's get it. So I'm always like jotting little notes down. Oh, Paul Chambers did that turnaround, but Christian McBride is a more modern player and he does it like that, but I can see where he was influenced by Ray Brown from this album with Oscar Peterson or Ella Fitzgerald. There are just so many things that are so intertwined and connected that you will start to discover once you listen more. Again, most important thing is listening. You don't really need anything more than your ears and a passion and a love for doing the work. And your walking bass situation is going to feel like it improves overnight. It's just the intent with which you practice, the intent with how you approach the time spent with the instrument. But for now, enjoy the 251s, enjoy listening to all these players who I hope are brand new to you, and just enjoy the process.